Okay, let's just go to our first speaker. He obviously needs no introduction. Come on up, Forrest.
The scarf is particularly good this year.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I love that. I originally was going to talk about some of the contradictions that are arising in my business because of the clash between old media and new media, but we have a fairly busy weekend ahead of us in my line of work, and I think I've got some flights booked over to the Near East, so I'm going to chat just a little about Iraq and try to give you some context in case you have forgotten some of the nuances that arose in 1991. First, it's important to remember that Saddam is basically a creature of United States foreign policy. For many years, we supported the corrupt regime of the Shah Reza Pahlavi in Iran, in no small part because he provided the CIA with a deep base of operations, and they were quite happy about that. Unfortunately, they were so pleased that they failed to notice an entire revolution rising up around them, which was pretty darn steamed about the CIA being there. And Iran ultimately, of course, turned against us in a very fierce way. To help counterbalance that, we began to put greater and greater weight on the regime of Saddam Hussein. This was for two reasons. One, because of the threat that Iran seemed to pose to United States foreign policy, and two, because Saddam was a member of the Ba'ath Party, which is Sunni Muslim, and Iraq is largely Shiite Muslim. The Sunnis are a minority, and Kurds, and the U.S. was afraid the Shiites would tilt toward Iran, and deeply afraid that the Kurds would rabble-rouse for their own state, which would involve Iran, Turkey, and Iraq, and would destabilize the entire region. And so Saddam was seen as an ally, as a friend of ours, and as a person who had deep pockets and was willing to buy our weapons, Germany's weapons, Britain's weapons, France's weapons, and so on. We failed to notice that Saddam had very big dreams. He saw himself as the new Nebuchadnezzar, and that he could pull together the old empire of Iraq, and that included annexing Kuwait. He had a hope to get Kuwait. He continues to have a hope to get Kuwait, and periodically he would argue with the Sabah family and amass troops along the border. In 1991, because of an argument over oil prices and money that they were owed, he did just that. In July of 91, there was a meeting between the U.S. Ambassador April Glaspie and Saddam Hussein. And it is still a point of dispute what was said at that meeting. But clearly the Iraqis believed that the United States would not be upset if they invaded, and invade they did. George Bush first gave a fairly weak response to this, and then after meeting with Margaret Thatcher, during which I'm convinced she beat him about the head and shoulders, he came out and said, "This shall not stand." Now, all manner of problems were presented for that, not least of which is that I was on a plane on the 14th of August into Baghdad with Ted Koppel. We were the first journalists in, and Koppel was there to interview Tariq Aziz, then foreign minister, and I was there to set up a base of operations for our reporting. And after I was there for a few days, I made contact with the communications officer, or the information minister, Jazm. We had a formal interview, and afterwards it became clear to me that the Iraqis were quite puzzled by the United States response, which was, "We're going to kick your ass." And he said, "Why don't we have a private conversation over here?" I said, "Yeah, but you have to understand, in my country, because they're very parochial people, and what I'm about to tell you will demonstrate that, I hope. I am not a member of the government. I have no connection with the government. I actually operate in opposition to the government at times." He said, "Yes, I'm a private citizen myself. I understand it." So we talked, and he leaned forward and said, "Tell me, why does your President Bush not want to talk to us? Publicly, privately, they will not talk to us." I said, "Well, you know, in the West, there's this tradition, you don't take hostages and then sit down and chat. It really annoys them." I said, "So why don't you let the hostages go?" He said, "It's not possible, you bomb us. This is why we have the hostages, not possible." I said, "All right, well, why don't you let the women and children go? And this is a gesture of good faith. Just do that." He said, "I like this idea, it's a good idea." And the guy's over there writing it down. And he said, "What next?" I'm a little stumped at this point, so I said, "Well, you know, I really think your government should go on Nightline." You know. I see this as a way to solve the whole thing. 2 members of your government will debate with 2 members of our government. We'll work it out. It'll be solved. We'll all feel good. I like this. This is a good idea. The next morning I wake up and indeed the women and children are being released. This is a thrilling moment. And Saddam Hussein has challenged Margaret Thatcher and George Bush to a debate, which was not at all what I had in mind. Really puzzled Bush. He was just kind of walking around saying, what's with this guy? I wound up in Saudi Arabia not long after that. And it became clear that war was inevitable and there would be no conversation. And it also became clear to me the brutality of Saddam's regime. You can hear about it, but when you actually see it, it's something. Let me tell you what bombing is like. I stood on the earth berm which separated Iraq and Kuwait and watched as this massive bombing was taking place. Behind you, the sky is lit up by running lights of airplanes. It's just astonishing. It's like this brilliantly lit thing. They turn them off as soon as they hit the border. They fly black, and all you see are bombs and flares. And I was with an Egyptian captain on the berm, and he said, he'd been there for days watching this. What's this? What's this? Is it good? I like this. And you see this light up, and just pew, as a missile is flying out, and he goes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The next morning, 2 Iraqis came fleeing toward us and surrendered. One of them was from Chicago, believe it or not. He had lived there. He had come back to Iraq sometime before, and these were conscripted people and had been stuck along the front as literally cannon fodder. All those people who were at the front taking the B-52 carpet bombing barely knew how to hold guns. And so that whole idea that there was this mass against us was wrong. They were just poor people who were getting wiped out. Later, I drove on into Kuwait City and saw it even more clearly. I hooked up with, just ahead of the Allies, and I hooked up with the Kuwaiti resistance, and they said, we must show you something. And they took me into the morgues and the hospitals and showed me the victims of Saddam's torture, piled up high. And they were unable to refrigerate them, didn't have time to bury them, and it was an awful, awful sight. And they said one more thing. They took me to a kindergarten, beautiful kindergarten, and as you walk along this open hallway, all along the wall are cartoon characters, Disney cartoon characters, Warner Brothers cartoon characters. There's a very light scene, and then you turn into a room, and Saddam's forces had chosen that as his torture room. And it was here that they would literally pluck people's eyeballs out or strip their skin off them as they tortured them. It was an astonishing, horrible sight. But the war was over, and there is one more codicil to that, and that is that I went on to Iran. I thought that Saddam was going to be overthrown. Silly me. The United States did not want the Ba'ath Party overthrown. They wanted it to remain in power. They would like Saddam to leave and then some other guy to come in. And they, in fact, had some plans for that. But the idea that Bush had said, you must rise up against this man, and said it over and over again, the Kurds and the Shiites believed. Unfortunately, the United States said, you can let your helicopters fly to Saddam. And he took that instead of providing medical care as a way to fly his gunships and to bomb the Shiites and to bomb the Kurds and send them fleeing wherever they could. And I found them perched, 300,000 came across in a single day. And I found them perched along a cliff with no food, no water, children who had been badly napalmed. Every morning at about 6 a.m. they would bury the children. And there they sat. And I was in this strange, surreal atmosphere for the first few days during which the United States refused to acknowledge that the Kurds even existed. And President Bush was enjoying the victory, and while I was there watching people be buried, the United States was celebrating. And it was only the pictures that had emerged from Turkey and Iran, I'm convinced, that forced the United States finally to begin its policy of protecting those people. The Shiites remain unprotected, and they have been slaughtered in the swamps ever since 1991 by Saddam, and they continue to be assaulted. Which brings us to today, and the cat and mouse game that has been going on with Saddam for all of these years, in which he's been trying to hide his weapons from inspectors as though we should have probably known it. He has, we believe, some 600 tons of VC nerve gas, some 4,000 tons of precursor chemicals, all these are unaccounted for, 19,000 liters of botulinus, 8,400 liters of anthrax, 2,000 liters of aflatoxin. They are missing 50 special warheads that can deliver chemicals and biological weapons to their neighbors, and they are uncertain about mobile launchers, guidance systems, and motors. Saddam clearly has an enormous amount that is hidden, which raises the final question of what then must we do? We can do nothing, which would certainly allow Saddam to escape the UN policies and is unacceptable. We can try to take him out. Today he is even stronger than he was in 1991. He has 90,000 specially trained forces, heavily armed, all devoted to his personal security. If you try to take Saddam out, you will lose forces at a very, very high number, and you may likely never achieve your aim. Or you could try to coerce him, which is what they're going to do very soon, most likely. Kofi Annan, the UN Secretary General, is flying tomorrow to Baghdad for one last-ditch effort to try to talk Saddam into complying with the UN policies. If he fails, there will be a strike. It will come in the dark of night when the moon is black. There will be cruise missiles that will fly in first. They'll be followed by F-117 stealth fighters that will knock out his eyes and ears, his communications systems, and then that will be followed by about 1,000 air attacks that will last over 5 or 6 days. At the end of it, they will have done very, very little to affect his ability to develop chemical and biological weapons. They might be able to hold it back for a year, in which time they will probably strike again if it continues in this same pattern. And we will have introduced to the world a very new kind of warfare, which is maintenance bombing. And that's where it stands right now. I'll be on a plane over there, and I invite you to only watch ABC News for the very best coverage. Thanks.